Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the people who are playing, who are watching the people who are watching the players who are playing, who are watching the players playing the Pro Tour, who are watching the people who are watching the metagame. And we take a look at the Modern, Standard, and Pioneer formats, and we take a look and see what the heck is going on. Now, I will say, before we get started in today's video, a couple of things that I want to mention. Pro Tour was this weekend, so we have that to look forward to as far as the metagame is concerned. And as far as Pioneer, we had a little bit of unfortunate news where Pioneer is not going to be featured on the competitive scene over the course of the 2026 season. So I'm kind of in a weird place in terms of what to do with Pioneer. Like, I still really enjoy the format and I want to keep up with it, but it seems like the direction that Wizards is heading maybe is not going to be featuring Pioneer anywhere in the near future. At least for now, we'll keep featuring it on the weekly metagame series, and I'm going to try to play it a little bit on stream, and maybe we'll upload a video here and there, but maybe playing a little bit less than I would want to due to the fact that it's not going to be in the rotation next season. So, with all of that out of the way, before we get started, take a quick word from our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com. This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. Be sure to use promo code DOOM at checkout if you guys want to buy any singles, sealed sleeves, or deck boxes. Cool Stuff Inc. They got cool stuff, and they got it in stock. And with that out of the way, let us go ahead and begin as we always do with Modern. And as I mentioned, Pro Tour Edge of Eternities, not Spider-Man, happened this past weekend, and the Pro Tour metagame was fantastic. Most played deck was Esper Goryo's, I think clocking in at around 16 or 17%. Maybe it might have been a little bit less than that. It was Esper Goryo's, Mono Blue Belcher, Boros Energy, things like that. Nothing was too dominant at the Pro Tour. In terms of win percentages, Amulet was a little high. I think it was in the 57% range. And there was one Amulet deck in the top 8 of the tournament. But the top 8, as far as diversity goes, it was 7 different decks. The whole thing was won by Mono Blue Belcher, and as you can see here, Belcher also won 2 additional challenges this weekend, and that's what I've been saying for the past couple of weeks. I kind of figured that a lot of people would maybe hedge more towards Boros was kind of on the decline a little bit, although in terms of online challenge data, it was increasing in metagame share, but as Boros increases, the decks that are good against it also increase, and to not to my surprise, Belcher did take down the Pro Tour. As you can see here, as far as the metagame is concerned, Affinity in first place here. We're going to take a look at why in just a second. Just a specific Hall of Famer that may have made a very, very deep run with Affinity. So that we'll take a look at that in a second. But Eldrazi-tron 8.3, Boros 10.1. Belcher took a little bit of a fall from 9.8 to 6.6, but again, won 3 events this weekend. Esper Goryo's up a little bit from last week, 4.5 to 8%. I think part of that is due to it being the most played deck at the Pro Tour. Although, I will say, Esper Goryo's overall maybe didn't have the greatest tournament. It did put one in the top 8, but the rest of the win percentages and numbers were not fantastic. Neobran, small uptick from 3.1 to 4.9. But as far as other than that, there's really not a ton of other movers here. Certainly the biggest one is Affinity, and then after that, it was up a little bit, and then Boros down fairly significantly from almost 18% to 10%. So now that we've looked at the metagame, let's go ahead and show you some deck lists. And we're going to kick things off with the aforementioned Affinity deck from none other than Hall of Famer Shuhei Nakamura at the Pro Tour, who ended up getting 15th place. Shuhei actually lost his win-in for top 8, and the reason that I wanted to highlight this, and the reason that I think a lot of people have been playing it, is this is a very different take on Affinity. You'll notice the weapons manufacturings in the main deck, something that not a lot of Affinity decks have been doing. And also to facilitate the weapons manufacturing, he's also playing 3 copies, if I can find it, of engineered explosives in the main deck to be able to pop all the munitions tokens, 3 Tormod's crypts just to give him more zeros. Like, look at this, for example, right? Most Affinity decks have the Baubles and the Opals and the Memnites, but he's playing a Bauble, Opal, Memnite, and then he's playing, in addition to that, 3 Tormods, 3 explosives, and the Claws of Gix, all to facilitate the weapons manufacturing. So not only does he have more opening hands that are extremely explosive, like he has more turn 1 Kappa Cannoneers, he also has more opening hands that abuse Pinnacle Emissary. So I think just overall a very, very well-built Affinity deck, and to be honest with you, I would expect nothing less from one of the greats, Shuhei Nakamura. Next deck we want to take a look at here is from Horiyuchi Makoto in 8th place. It shows 8th place because that was the standings after Swiss, although Horiyuchi did win his quarterfinal matchup, losing in the semifinals. The reason I wanted to highlight this deck list, it's Esper Blank, and there's definitely some similarities, but remember how I've been saying over the past couple of weeks, where we're going to see a shift in trends in terms of how the Blink decks are built. You have the traditional Blink package of Quantum Riddler and Ephemerate, but you'll also notice there's no copies of Solitude in this deck, and there's only 2 Ephemerates. So this is a much more blue-focused version, 4 Force of Negation and 4 Subtlety in the main deck. That is a statement. Horiyuchi is definitely more worried about the degenerate, like, linear combo decks, as opposed to something like Solitude, which is normally good against Boros. And I think that makes sense, given the metagame he expected. That being said, I don't necessarily know if this is going to be the best way to build Blink moving forward. I really think this is a specifically surgical metagame call that was designed for maybe a tournament where you expect significantly less Boros, because I would have to imagine, without playing Solitude and all those kinds of things, I would guess this version is a lot worse against Boros. So keep that in mind when you're doing testing. But I just wanted to highlight this as sort of a different approach and definitely a different way to build Blink, kind of more of like this more mid-range focused version than your typical like Flicker Wisp, Solitude, Max Ephemerates, that kind of thing. We're going to go ahead and take a look in some challenges here. This is coming from Sprouts in 19th place in one of the challenges this past weekend. And at a first glance, this looks like your sort of semi-traditional Necro Dominance deck, right? You have Necro Dominance, Soul Spike to gain a bunch of life and utilize those extra cards that you're drawing off Necro. Same thing with like Force of Despair on your opponent's turn, March of Wretched Sorrow to pitch all the cards and gain a bunch of the life that you lost back from the Necro. But there's a bit of a twist here. So we're not actually mono black, we're 3 colors. So we're splashing blue for Psychic Frog, which just a good card, and notably one that works very well with Necro Dominance, where if you draw a bunch of extra cards off of Necro, you can convert those into counters on Frog, still in your end step before you go to discard. The other really cool part about this deck is Cosmogoyf. So Cosmogoyf is a card from Edge of Eternities that people have been trying for a little bit now, and it's sort of like a Tarmogoyf, but it counts the number of cards in exile. Well, it just so happens you're exiling cards to Soul Spike, you're exiling cards to Force of Despair, exiling cards to March of Wretched Sorrow. You can also, if you have a bunch of stuff in your graveyard, you can exile all of those cards to Psychic Frog. And also, most importantly, Necro Dominance has this line of text that says, if a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So really cool looking take on the Necro Dominance deck here from Sprouts. Take a look at the sideboard here for posterity's sake. But yeah, definitely a spicy looking list, and also Rite of Consumption with Psychic Frog, anybody? And I failed to mention this in the intro because we haven't seen a lot of Spider-Man cards. There really wasn't a lot at the Pro Tour. This was the first week of Spider-Man on the MTGO challenges, well, Tour of the Omen Paths. I was trying to find some deck lists in Modern that feature these cards. Really not a lot, but there was one here from user Medvedev in 30th place. This is a different take on Hollow One, where, I mean, it's mostly the same, right? Burning Inquiry to draw discard, same thing with Faithless Looting, same thing with Goblin Lore, draw 4, discard 3 at random. Ideally, you don't want to discard your Hollow Ones, but as Hollow One players know, you live by the Inquiry and you die by the Inquiry. But the new addition here is Cam and Ferric Havoc Duo. 1/2 flying haste for 2, and whenever you discard a card, gets +2/+0. So it sort of works this in a similar vein to Marauding Mako and Flameblade Adept to kind of give you more redundancy on that type of effect. You now have 12 of those more aggressive creatures. And I do also appreciate the fact that Cam and Ferric has haste, where if you don't have an arena, which to be fair, this deck is playing 4 of them, But if you don't have an arena, then you can play Cam, play a Burning Inquiry, get +6/+0, attack for 7. Combining that with Detective's Phoenix on one of your other creatures gives you some more flying as well. So cool looking take on the Hollow One deck list with Cam and Ferric. And with Modern out of the way, let us go ahead and switch over to Pioneer. And here it is, Pioneer. So we've seen a little bit of a decline in terms of mono red mice over the past couple of weeks. I mean, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point where it was approaching 33 or 34%. So we're down significantly from that. Still definitely the most played deck. Turns out Heartfire, Hero, and Monstrous Rage, pretty good cards. Is it Phoenix down a little bit from 12.5 to 9.4? Mono Black, again, down 12.5 to 6.3, but then Rakdos Demons is up a little bit. If you combine the two, last week it was about 23%. This week it's about 20. So, if you combine the black mid-range decks, they're still down overall. Boros Convoke up a little bit. Azorius Control up a little bit. Other than that, Orzhov Monument had a pretty big increase from 3.1 to 6.8. But the rest of the things are kind of just some small movements here and there. You see the winners on your screen, 2 challenges won by Orzhov Monument. That deck hasn't really changed a lot over the past, I'm trying to remember when it first came out, like 2 months ago at this point. So it's mostly been the same, kind of like the white discard outlets, pairing that with Greasefang, Monument to Endurance, the Mycosynth Gardens, things like that. But overall, I would say a relatively healthy format. And also, Pioneer got some pretty sweet additions from Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and check those out. The first one I want to go ahead and highlight here from Claudio, you may remember that name, 3rd place in one of the I think it might have been the first or second Pioneer Challenge with the new cards. And this deck list looks wild. So you may have seen some 5-color Legends deck before in Pioneer that were sporting Relic of Legends as kind of the main engine piece. And we still have that. And then basically the main engine of the deck is using Relic with Inti and Rona, where the Rona is draw discard, the discard triggers Inti, and then every time you play a legendary spell, you can untap the Rona, draw discard, trigger the Inti again, and it really allows you to just continuously churn through your deck. Now the win condition here is pretty spicy. So you'll notice this deck is playing 4 Yera and Oski, which is an End-Web creature you can cast. So End-Web is the equivalent to the web-slinging mechanic in Paper, where you can pay a discounted cost, pick up a tapped creature, and cast this for its End-Web cost instead of paying its real mana cost. So we have 4 of those and a Darval, essentially for all intents and purposes, just the 5th copy of Yera. But the combo here is if you have any 2 of these, it doesn't matter if you have 2 Yeras or 1 of each, with a Relic of Legends. Okay, so Relic of Legends allows you to tap the Yera, say you have a Yera in play. You tap the Yera for a white mana with Relic, then you use the End-Web cost of your second Yera, additional cost, return the first one. When the second one comes into play, there's no Legend rule because the first one is already in your hand. So what that allows you to do is give you infinite Enter the Battlefield triggers. What can you do with infinite Enter the Battlefield triggers? Well, you can go to 10 trillion life. This deck is actually not featuring, I mean, you can make infinite tokens with a Lenny. You can also draw your entire deck with, if you have a Rona in play, because every time you're going through that loop, you're casting another spell. So you can eventually find the Eleni to make infinite tokens. I've seen some people play Tiny Bones Joins Up, which drains when a legend comes into play. So you could do that as well. But yeah, the rest of the deck is kind of, there's a couple of Fleams, there's one Ademi, still some other new cards here. But the rest of the deck is kind of just like the Legends core that you may have seen floating around before. And trust me, this is not the only Legends deck that we're going to be taking a look at in today's video. And let's go ahead and continue to showcase some new cards. This is actually a first place list here from Mateus F34. Real prowess, and a lot of these cards you're probably familiar with. Kamano, Swift Spear, Soulscar, Challenger, the removal spells, Burst Lightning, Monstrous Rage, Reckless Rage. And, a card you may also have heard of before, Cori-steel Cutter, it's banned in Standard. The new card here, very simple, Firebrain Scheme. Single red mana sorcery, and I would say most of the time you're going to be exiling 2 and choosing 1. But the really cool thing about Firebrain Scheme is the second ability, 1 or 2 creatures each get +1/+0 and first strike, works very well with your prowess creatures, and more importantly, Emberheart Challenger. So it kind of gives you a way to, like, say if you have a Soul Scar and a Challenger in play, right? If you Firebrain Scheme for the second mode, you give both of them +1/+0. That will trigger the prowess, so you're effectively paying 1 mana to deal 4 damage because you get 2 +1/+0s from the card itself, and then 2 prowess triggers, and you're still getting a Challenger trigger. So just, I would say, a pretty significant upgrade to some of the cards that this deck was playing before, and would not be surprised if this was a mainstay in multiple formats. And I mentioned that we were going to be taking a look at some more Legends decks, and here it is from Celestial in 17th place. So, similar concept, right? Relic of Legends, Rona, Inti, Yera, and Oski, these cards that we've already seen before, so you still have the combo of Yera and Relic of Legends with Halia. Again, this one is also not playing a Tiny Bones Giant Sub, but it does have the Eleni to gain infinite creatures. But the big difference here is you're pairing all of these Legends cards with Retraction Helix and Mox Amber, which is kind of cool because this deck kind of wants to play Mox Amber anyways, because it's just playing a bunch of Legends. And once you have the Rona Helix Amber combo, you can generate infinite mana, infinite loots with Rona, eventually find the Yera and the Relic, and kind of just go from there. So it sort of gives you an additional sort of like a backdoor combo, which I think is kind of cool. And it's a backdoor combo where, you know, I mean, I guess the Helix itself is not a fantastic card, but you kind of already wanted to play Mox Amber anyways. So take a look at the sideboard there. So yeah, just a slightly different take on the Legends deck featuring lots of Spider-Man cards. And I had to dig a little bit to try and find some Spider-Man cards in Pioneer, but I was able to find one more, and that is from user Applap in 28th place. So there's only 2 in the main deck, and it is Desecrex, Gift of Servitude. But I like this card quite a bit in these Rakdos-style decks. You'll notice this particular list not playing the Demon package. No Annexes, no Blade of the Onis, none of that stuff. But Desecrex works very well with a lot of your cards. So it has Mayhem, which means that if you discard it, you can cast it that turn. You have a lot of ways to discard it, notably some of the best cards in your deck, Bloodtithe Harvester, Fear of Missing Out, and Fable the Mirror Breaker. So this user is playing 4 Shieldrids. It's kind of a lot, but just kind of your normal black-red stuff, just including Desecrex as a powerful card to discard to, again, the Fable Fears and the Bloodtithe Harvesters. So that is going to do it for Pioneer. Now, as far as Standard is concerned, there is quite a bit of Spider-Man to take a look at. And last but not least, here is the Standard format. Now, as far as the format is concerned, I mean, it is still a lot of Mono Red and Cauldron. It's really funny to see the evolution of Mono Red versus Cauldron. Like last week it was 39%, this week it's 28%. Cauldron was 15.6%, up a little bit, but not too much. Although, like if you look at the number of challenges, Cauldron won 3, Red won 1, which, given the fact that there is a 10% metagame share disparity, I think we can all agree that Cauldron is by far the best deck. It's just, there's a lot of factors that go into MTGO with maybe card availability, maybe timing, the time of the challenges, and it's a lot easier to double or triple queue with Mono Red, so you have to keep those factors in mind when you're looking at these numbers. Dimir midrange up a little bit from 12% to 14.7%. Not a ton of other movers. I mean, Azorius Control down a little, Simic Omni down a little, 4-color Control the same, Jeskai Control up a little, Sultai Self-Mill, Boros Burn, Simic Aggro. These numbers are, I mean, they're up a little bit, nothing too crazy. But yeah, in terms of the metagame itself, I mean, it kind of is what it is. We're in this weird waiting period where we kind of all know something is going to happen on November 10th, and it's sort of just a waiting game at this point. So not really much to say about the metagame itself, but boy, do I have some Spider-Man cards to show you. First up here is from Predrag133 in 14th place. So this is Golgari midrange, but quite a bit different than maybe what you're used to. So the new cards here to highlight are Bracco, Heartless Hunter, 4/3 trample, and whenever a creature an opponent controls with the greatest power dies, you draw a card, put a counter on Bracco. Luis, which is a pretty big mana sink, it's like a scalable Siege Rhino is kind of the comparison that I've been using. So those are really only the 2 new cards. But when it comes to Bracco specifically, I think Bracco is crazy in a deck like this. So first and foremost, the big synergy is with Hollowmurk Siege. So if you choose Sultai, it says, whenever a counter is put on a creature you control, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn, right? But if you have Bracco and a bunch of instant speed removal spells, okay? So let's say you trigger it once on your turn. Maybe you have a Bracco in play, you kill a creature. When you kill a creature and when you trigger Bracco, Bracco draws a card and puts a counter. The counter will then trigger the siege to draw a card. So if you can kill a creature on your opponent's turn, you can also use the Bracco, which will trigger on your opponent's turn to draw an extra card off of the siege. You see where this is going. So you have a bunch of ways to put counters. You have stuff like Scavenging Ooze, which can trigger the Hollowmurk Siege. Summon Fenrir. Whenever you cast your next creature spell, enters with an additional counter, that will trigger the Hollowmurk Siege. Genova, combat on your turn, put a number of counters equal to Genova's power on a creature. That will trigger it, or a Bolroid. So tons of ways to trigger this Hollowmurk Siege and kind of using that as your main value engine. Typical Golgari stuff, we got elves, we got some other 1-drops, bunch of removal spells. But yeah, kind of leaning a little bit more into the fact that Bracco is just this huge card advantage machine, and I kind of like that quite a bit. Next up here from Lucas G1 GGs, we have in 28th place, this is Rakdos Discard. Rakdos I guess we can call this a Mayhem deck. I think it's fair to say that. There's quite a few Mayhem cards in here. We have Kivni, which is Mayhem for a single mana. This is also a discard outlet in and of itself. Wekdu, which is a card that I didn't have in my initial Mayhem builds because I thought 1 mana for a 2/2 flyer was just too mopey, but you know, it is more like payoffs for discarding. And I think a big issue that I was running into when I was playing Mayhem is essentially every single Mayhem creature is legendary. So if you have 4 Kivnis and 4 Desecrex, then you just draw too many copies of each of them. So just as far as having a bunch of different names, playing the Wektus makes sense. Desecrex, which is 2 mana 4/3, that returns something. So a bunch of Mayhem cards. Bloodghast, which also wants to be discarded. You have other ways to pay you off for discarding cards. Mako puts a bunch of counters. Inti exiles cards. You can draw more cards that way. And then more importantly, Monument to Endurance. So every time you discard, which you can do on your opponent's turn, because you have stuff like Bitter Triumph and things like that, or you can even cycle a Marauding Mako, you can trigger Monument on their turn. You can also do some cool stuff where you have exclusive Nightclub to discard. You can play that from your graveyard. Quint's Insight is both a discard outlet and somewhat of a payoff, where you can, I guess you only have the 1 Nightclub to play from the graveyard. But every time you play spells from the graveyard, then you also get more damage. It also says whenever you play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, not just your graveyard. So if you play spells from exile off of Inti, that will also deal damage. And using Knife Trick as a discard removal spell as well. So a little bit of a different take on the Mayhem decks. I think these are still sort of in the very, very early stages. We haven't really found the best version, but I feel like there is a really good version of this deck out there somewhere. And here is another example of, I don't think we found the best version yet, but it seems breakable. And that is coming to us from Claudio in 30th place. I saw a couple different versions of Kavero floating around over the weekend. This is the one that I've chosen to highlight because I think this is one of the ones that is just going the most all in. And I think I like that approach, although you do end up being a little bit worse against graveyard hate. But the idea is you have Kavero, which says you can have it enter as a copy of any creature in a graveyard, except he retains his name and is a 4/4. So the combo is if you have Bringer of the Last Gift in your graveyard, which says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you basically living death. Each player sacrifices all creatures, then you return everything else from the graveyard to play. The reason it works, even though you're only paying 4 mana, you're still casting the Kavero, so it still will trigger the Bringer. But this version even goes deeper than that, because a lot of times what I've seen is that Bringer will get back a couple of random 2/2s, maybe one other body that maybe is like a Voltborn Tyrant or something like that. But this deck just aims to mill as much as possible, and then just kind of OTK the turn you bring stuff back, where if you get back 2 Craterhoof Behemoths off of the bringer, plus all of your other bodies, then you can just kill them with the 2 Craterhoofs that turn. And it's not that hard to assemble enough bodies in the graveyard, because even just stuff like Town Greeter and Scholar, they're small bodies, but they still count as number of creatures in play for Craterhoof Behemoth. So you have a ton of Turbo Mill with Cash Grab, Balemerc, Town Greeter, Esper Origins, Rakshas's Bargain, and then kind of leaning into the discarding with Scholar as well, and same with Meringue. So kind of a pretty streamlined version of this kind of Sultai living end strategy. And like I said, this is one that I think a lot of people should spend some time on, because I think this deck has the potential to be extremely powerful if you can find the right version. And last but certainly not least, shout out to my personal favorite card in the entire Spider-Man set, Drunith, Reviver of the Hive. This list is coming to us from Bauer in 31st place in one of the challenges, so not the best performance, but this is really the only Drunith list that I could find, and I had to showcase it because I still believe in this card. I think this card is one of the best cards in the set. People are still sleeping on it. This version is certainly more 1-drop heavy than my initial versions were going to be. I think I had 12 1-drops. This user has 14, 4 Elf, 4 Hemosymbic, 3 Pollinator, 3 Paw Patch. So even has more Mana Dorks, which is not terrible, because more Mana Dorks can help you kind of curve faster into Ouroboros. So I don't hate that approach. The 2s are Beastbinder, Drunith itself, and Imago. Drunith being the card that allows you to copy stuff, where if you play a 1-drop, you can copy it, put a counter on it, play a 2-drop, copy the 2-drop, put a counter on it, so on and so forth. Less 3s and less 4s, only 3 Siroks and 4 Ouroboros. But the interesting thing here is, so you have enough 1s and 2s, right? Because the idea with Drunith is you want to go up the curve. You want to play a 1-drop, copy it, play a 2-drop, copy it, play a 3-drop. You have to do one of each. But even if you don't have that many 3-drops, if you have a way to jump the curve on Drunith, which is basically give it an extra power, right? So for example, you play a 1-drop, play a 2-drop, you have 2 counters in Drunith, but you don't have a 3-drop anywhere in sight. You can forcefully put a counter or add its power with one of these 3 cards, and then you play your Ouroboros, you copy it, and then your opponent takes a lot of damage that turn. So that's kind of the idea. Again, I'm not sure about the 1-drop count. I want to still work on some of these numbers, but this is very, very close to what I have been trying. And again, like I said, I still believe in this card. I think it's really, really powerful. And that, my friends, is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to never miss one of the episodes that get posted every single week. Thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, adios.